Good morning, everybody. This is Nevin Gussack, your host of the Patriotic Populist, and I'd like to welcome our recurring guest, geopolitical expert J.R. Nyquist. Mr. Nyquist is a prolific author. He has his own blog, J.R. Nyquist blog, where he discusses geopolitics, political science, philosophy, and economics. He's the author of multiple books, including Origins of the Fourth World War and The Fool and His Enemy. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Nyquist to our show. So how you doing, Jeff?
Thank you, Nevin. I'm okay so far. I'm not in Cuba being squashed by a tank, but I'm okay.
Well, freedom has its blessings here in the United States. That is for sure.
It does. It does.
I just
Yeah.
have to have my handy dandy coffee here. So today we're going to catch up, and we wanted to catch up with you regarding some current events throughout the world. And of course, uh, one item that is in the news is Cuba, and most people will think, well, big deal, it's a nasty dictatorship, but does it really pose a threat to the United States? What should we do in Cuba? There are some who say SOS Cuba, a lot of the Cuban anti-communist activists who feel that we should militarily intervene in Cuba, such as my girlfriend, Lady Delgado, who's a staunch anti-communist and is very politically active. And then you have others that say we should stay out. And then others will say, well, it's just because they don't have access to vaccines and certain supplies. And it has nothing to do with libertad or freedom. And then, of course, you look at actually what the signs and chants the demonstrators are holding in Cuba, and they are clearly calling for freedom and better living conditions and working conditions. Others blame the much exaggerated so-called U.S. embargo for all the woes in Cuba. Even though Cuba can get tons of goods on the world market, in fact, Cuba is an exporter of medical devices and supplies to other countries, as well as doctors uh, who are basically slave laborers on loan from the government to Cuba's allies throughout the world. So how do we make sense out of this situation in Cuba? What is going on in Cuba according to your sources, Jeff?
Well, of course, they returned to the old Cuban peso, I think, in January. They've suffered a negative 11% economic growth last year. The economy was based on European tourism and Venezuelan oil, and a few other things that basically gave way last year. The Europeans weren't coming because of COVID, wasn't going to happen. The Venezuelan oil didn't come. Venezuela's breaking down. There's problems in the world economy, and there was massive inflation in the country. People also, one of the things Trump did is, I think the offices were closed. What was it? Western Union people could send money to Cuba and support their relatives there. That got cut off. So there were a number of things that happened, and people can't get by anymore. There's no food, there's no medicine, there's nothing for them, and there's also no freedom. There hasn't been freedom in there since the communists took power under Fidel Castro in 1959. So it basically, the younger generation, especially people, their slogan of the people revolting is fatherland and life, right? Which is a kind of mockery of Fidel Castro's fatherland or death, right? It's sort of a no, we don't want to die. We want life. So there's this. So you could say that this is the people there are just sick and tired of it now. The regime is. Let's face it. The army officers. I was told by a former Cuban um, a national that the army officers in the army, they send their children to school in Europe. They live very well. They got a nice deal. They're going to support the regime. No other regime is going to give them the kind of life they have, a cut above everybody else. So, but what are the troops going to do? What are the people going to do? Are they going to really fire on their own people? We don't get a lot of news about what's happening on the ground there. We just don't.
Yeah, and it's very tragic. I mean, it is a closed society like North Korea, like China, in certain ways, Russia, Vietnam, Venezuela. So that's a huge problem. I mean, the little bit of information that is coming out from Cuba and the information from sources that I have personally is that the protests are all over the country.
Hmm.
It's not just combined. It's not just in Matanzas or Havana. It's also all over the place. There are a lot of mass arrests left and right. The internet service between Cuba and the United States is very spotty. One of the things I do agree with Ron DeSantis, our governor here in Florida, is he's trying to push the Biden administration and make noise about getting internet contact between Cuban nationals and their American family members here in South Florida and elsewhere. Um, but one of the things that concerns me about Cuba is the national security dimension here. Now, most people, including aided and abetted by Cuban disinformation, like the Cuban intelligence officer who worked for the DIA, Anabela Montes, wrote reports downplaying the Cuban threat to the United States. And of course, Cuba itself can't invade the United States successfully. So my question to you is why is Cuba a significant problem in the hemisphere? What are they doing? Who are they aligning themselves with? And what should we do about the protests in Cuba and the dictatorship there?
Well, Cuba is an enemy country. Its leaders consider the United States an enemy. It's 70 miles from our shores there in Florida, down where you are. Look, the Russians were training the Cubans on how to poison the headwaters of the Mississippi back in the 1980s. They had schools set up down there with Russian instructors. The Russians and Chinese operate down there now. Russia and China are allied. I think one of Putin's strategic advisors said recently in an interview in Russia that they're winning the new Cold War, and because Russia and China are allied and the United States is caught totally flat-footed. Cuba's part of that combination. Cuba's part of bringing down the United States. They've got their tentacles all over Mexico. They're involved in cocaine smuggling and trafficking. They're supporting the guerrillas in South America that are operating the FARC down there in Colombia. Their tentacles of subversion go all the way to Washington and every country in Latin America. Um, so it's an extension of Chinese and Russian power in the Spanish-speaking world.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you on that. And to add to your points, I mean, according to various analysts like Toby Westerman and other experts in the field, Cuba, up until at least 2014, the Cuban state banking system assisted Al Qaeda. Cuba has been aligned with the intelligence and the militaries of Iran, Russia, and China. The Chinese, recent reports of the Epoch Times revealed that the Chinese PLA are training the Black Wasps, which used to be known as the Tropas Especiales of the Ministry of the Interior, which was Cuba's special forces, amongst some of the best in the world. They have military equipment exchange agreements with North Korea. They were formerly allied to Saddam Hussein's Iraq. They participated in sending forces to Syria, along with the Russians and the Chinese a few years back. The Cubans also have had ties with the American left extremists. I suspect, like, for example, openly with Black Lives Matter. In fact, if you do a Google Earth image of some office next door neighbor of the Cuba's UN mission, you have signs and stickers for Black Lives Matter plastered all over it. And I sent that to our friend Trevor Loudon, you and other anti-communist analysts, because I think that's significant. The Cubans also have a lot of ties with other forces of the American left here too as well. They harbor terrorists from the Spanish ETA, the IRA, various African-American terrorists associated with the Black Panthers in the Republic of New Africa, like cop killer Joanne Chesimard. They've been fingers have pointed to Cuban agents and Venezuelan agents being involved in anti-neoliberalism riots in Chile and other South American countries. And they have ties, very, very close ties, almost controlling the Venezuelan government through military and intelligence operatives. And the list goes on and on and on. So, and the Russians now have military cooperation with Cuba. That's openly has been open since 2015, if not before. And
Well,
China
yeah,
controls the signals intelligence facilities in Bejucal in Cuba, the Chinese PLA. So they're spying on the Americans.
and the Russians are back in there spying on us too. I mean, look, off and on, they have detected. A lot of people don't remember that it was in H.R. Haldeman's book in the 1970s. U.S. satellites discovered soccer fields in certain places in Cuba, and H.R. Haldeman recounts how Henry Kissinger showed him these satellite pictures. Those are soccer fields. And H.R. Haldeman said, so? He said, the Cubans play baseball, the Russians play soccer. It means that there were Russian troops secretly, in Cuba in the 1970s. And of course, what a lot of people don't know in the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Russians sent an army to Cuba. I think it was when it reached full size, it was close to 50,000 troops, and they had tactical nuclear weapons
That's right.
in Cuba, right?
That's right.
So, and we didn't even know that. If we had dropped the 82nd and 101st Airborne into Cuba, they would have been facing a terrible situation because our intelligence didn't understand. I don't think to this day that we really understand what we're dealing with these kind of enemies right in our own hemisphere. Look, we had the Monroe Doctrine. And it was some pretty smart people like our founding fathers came up with this idea. Well, John Quincy Adams was Secretary of State then, and basically when James Monroe was president. And it was the idea that we're not going to let other powers establish power centers in our hemisphere, that we're going to stick up for the independence of the countries here, that they're not going to be party to some kind of empire that's trying to come into this hemisphere. Well, we kind of let that go after the Cuban Missile Crisis. You got Venezuela now, you got Nicaragua, you got Cuba, you got a couple other players. You look at Bolivia. They almost got hold of Brazil before Bolsonaro got elected. They're all over South America. I mean, I interviewed Hugo Chavez's pilot, one of his former, I think he was former chief of air staff too at one time. And he told me that Chavez's dream was to make a communist bloc out of South America that would attack America, economically, with terrorism and openly, even with nuclear weapons if they could get a hold of them. I mean, that's what this guy, heard out of Chavez's own lips years ago. So it's like, people have got to be pretty stupid to tolerate this kind of thing, our enemies setting up bases in countries. If they're going to be a revolution in Cuba, by the way, those Cuban people are never going to get free of those tanks. If there are especially Russian and Chinese or North Korean special forces there to support the regime, they're going to need support. Of course, I don't know. It depends on how good our intelligence is. If we send troops and they all get killed because there's Chinese or Russians there with tactical nuclear weapons, that would not be the right move. But we should not be allowing them to have a base from which to attack the United States in the event of a full-scale war, especially now when Russia and China are allied. This is particularly serious that this country exists here and does this. And the fact is that this is an evil dictatorship that tortures and kills its own people, that deprives them of their freedom. They live in total poverty, and they're just totally focused on destroying us. What's good about Communist Cuba? Nothing. Nothing's good about it unless you're a communist in Cuba. Then it's your paradise.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. I think you cover all the bases. You bring up the Monroe Doctrine, which is very significant from my point of view, because I had a show with my co-host, Herschel Miller, and we were talking about this too as well, that Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, They're back in the MAS is back in a parliamentary majority. The Communist Party of Evo Morales is back in a parliamentary majority, I believe, in Bolivia. And it looks like the Workers' Party is now poised to possibly make a comeback in Brazil, which will be a very significant threat to the United States. And now Lula da Silva has dropped the mask of moderation, which was always a tactical ploy of his for decades. And now he is openly like a fire-breathing Marxist-Leninist, totally radicalized. By the way, Lula da Silva, Mr. Democracy, is a big supporter of the events, the repression in Cuba, by the way.
Well, he was a close friend of Fidel Castro.
Well, he started the Sao Paulo Forum with Fidel Castro in 1990. Yep.
Right.
So what should we do as American policymakers? Let's assume that Joe Biden is out of the White House. We get another Republican president who will be on foreign policy better than most of the Democrats these days. What would you advise him or her, a next Republican president, to do with Cuba, as well as these other anti-American countries in the Southern Hemisphere?
Well, the first thing I would do is if the Chinese make a move on Taiwan, we would make a move on Cuba immediately. That would be the first thing I would tell them. All right, they want to take Taiwan, we'll just take Cuba. After all, we've taken it before. Look, if the United States is weakened, and we are weakened versus Russia and China, there's one place in the globe where we can exert superior power, and that's the Caribbean. And if they're going to push us out of the Western Pacific, if they're going to try to wrestle with us over Ukraine and basically take away the sovereignty of countries that were former Soviet republics, that's how we retaliate. We just remove their positions in the Western Hemisphere. You know, if Russia says they're taking back Ukraine, oh, okay. We're gonna go into Venezuela and Nicaragua. We're gonna get rid of Ortega. We're gonna get rid of that dictator down there in Venezuela. What's his name?
Nicolas Maduro.
Nicolas Maduro, right? We're gonna get rid of those people. And look, people can call it American imperialism. Hey, you know what? What about the imperialism of China and Russia putting troops in Venezuela? Of building bases in Nicaragua, of using Cuba as a place to stage nuclear rockets in 1962. Do you think we want that kind of thing? Do you think we need that? No, we don't. They are our enemy, and they're announcing that they're our enemy. So we're going to let them just play around down there? No, we shouldn't. We need to be proactive in our own hemisphere if we can't be strong anywhere else. Of course, this president we got right now, you know, he's not going to do anything for those poor people in Cuba. And by the way, they're not going to get their freedom unless we exert some kind of pressure there. We could collapse that regime. And even without direct military action, just the threat of military action could collapse it. Of course, it could also start World War III, given the way the Russians and the Chinese are. But I mean, there's a number of steps we could take. I mean, rocks don't hurt tanks. But you never know with if a whole people stand up and they've had enough. And this is the thing that China is confronting too. And Russia. Russia's had protests before the COVID outbreak. China was having protests. And they've got a food crisis. And you see the flooding in China. You know, and this is what this COVID thing, the Chinese, if they released it accidentally on purpose, whatever the story is there, it's really hurt us. But it's also hurt them. And the unintended consequences of strategies that could be, you know, a revolution in Cuba, uprisings in China, problems in the former Soviet Union, their own plan could backfire on them. And it wouldn't be the first time that the communist plans backfired on them.
Well, we know Biden is not going to do anything significant to help the pro-freedom rebellions really anywhere in the world.
Why is that, Nevin? Could you tell us why Biden wouldn't help people who want to be free in Cuba? Why wouldn't he do that? Well, why won't the Democratic Party rally to freedom in Cuba now? Is there a reason why they don't want to rally to freedom in Cuba?
Well, I've studied Joe Biden. Joe Biden is an opportunistic politician. On the one hand, he's known as Senator Credit Card and the senator from MBNA. On the flip side, on foreign policy, particularly in the 70s all the way through the 80s, and even when he was a vice president under Obama, he has supported every kind of engagement with China, with the Soviet Union, with Russia. He has opposed all of our defense buildups during the latter stages of what I term the open Cold War. And here's another thing that's significant.
No, wait a minute, Nevin. Is that really opportunistic, or is he a communist sympathizer?
Well, he might be. I mean, whatever the reasons he
likes the Chinese communist leaders. He really likes those guys. He said that,
Of course, because
they're nice. They're good people, he said. The people
because he knows where the power is. And
forced organ donations, right? Here, I need your kidneys, man.
Well, there's one thing that
Xi Jinping needs your kidneys.
This is one thing that's deeply disturbing, and why the Republicans didn't make hay of it, I don't know. Jeff, do you remember Vladimir Bukovsky? One of his leaked documents, it talked about transcripted notes from the Vadim Zagladin, who is a CPSU international department official. And in that transcript document, it was a meeting with Joe Biden when he was a senator back in 1979. And Joe Biden was saying, along with Richard Lugar, Republican senator from Indiana, they were like, with the Soviets, we're just going to pretend to care about the dissidents, but we're really not going to do anything because we don't want to rock the boat and stuff like that. That's what you're dealing with. So whatever the man's motivations, the fact of the matter is he ain't going to do diddly squat for the freedom fighters in Cuba.
But then that must mean you know his motivations if you know he's not going to do anything. Right?
He's a dirty, opportunistic politician that doesn't give a damn about anything. He's going to go where the prevailing wind's in. And look, somebody like Joe Biden, I mean, take a look at what Yuri Bezmenov said about the former Novosti/KGB defector that was involved in a lot of subversive activities in India and Bangladesh. Remember, the type of people that served Soviet interests even more than the ideologues were the people that were opportunistic, the people that were greedy, people that were non-ideological, pathological liars, that kind of thing. Remember the interviews with Yuri Bezmenov? And he talked about that. And Joe Biden kind of fits the bill. You're not dealing with a good, wholesome American leader now, are we? He kind of fits the bill with his record. So yeah, he's not going to do anything. You and I know that. The Democratic Party, I got 2 books on myself over here.
Well, surely, Nevin, you're not suggesting that the president of the United States has been bribed or bought by the Russians or Chinese, are you?
Well, why not? Why not? I'm speaking about evidence. Like, I got my degree in history.
No, wait a minute. Let me go back and remember now. What tycoon supported Joe Biden, that little minor Delaware nobody? Who supported him to become a senator? Oh, it was Armand Hammer.
You mean the guy with the baking soda? You mean Mr. Baking Soda?
Well, he ended up buying that as a joke. He bought Armand Hammer as a joke. But no, Armand Hammer was the friend of Lenin, Lenin's buddy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Armand Hammer, the communist businessman.
Yes.
Yeah, who, by the way, supported Al Gore Sr. and Jr. into the Senate out of Tennessee. And Al Gore Jr. being Bill Clinton's vice president. Oh, and guess what? Joe Biden was Barack Obama's vice president. Gee, I wonder why Clinton picked a guy to be his vice president who got into the Senate because Armand Hammer helped his family into the United States Senate. And I wonder why Obama picked a guy who Armand Hammer had helped into the United States Senate. Oh, wait a minute. Barack Obama was sort of taken under the wing of a Communist Party member named Frank Marshall Davis when he was a teenager, who taught him everything. He learned everything from Frank.
Well, but why stop at Frank? Why don't we talk about Alice Palmer, who attended the 27th?
That nice lady Alice Palmer.
Yes.
That nice lady Alice Palmer gave up her Illinois legislative seat so that Barack Obama could enter the Illinois legislature. Wasn't that kind of her? Because she was going to run for Congress. Of course, when she found out she wasn't going to win her seat, she tried to grab it back, but it was too late.
But
Couldn't be an Indian
how
giver.
about Tom Fife? Remember that name, that blast
Tom
from the
Fife,
past?
I just chatted with him the last 3 weeks.
Oh my God.
I did.
Okay.
I had, out of
Breaking
not being in
news.
touch with him for years.
You gotta get him, hook him up with Trevor Loudon. You gotta hook him up. But I now, first of all, explain who Tom Fife is. I mean, are you comfortable explaining who he is? I
Yeah,
mean,
sure.
yeah.
Tom Fife was a physicist, basically, and working on, back in the early 90s, working on these handheld devices. Well, now we call it an iPhone, but back in the day, before there were these smartphones, they were working on kind of devices for businessmen to use that would, you'd have your calendar, or you'd have things. They were working on those things. And the Russian Academy of Sciences, because the Soviet Union had just fallen, was going into partnership with a British company, and there was a British and Americans, and it was scientists on both sides, a joint venture kind of deal. And so Fife was involved in this with the British partners. So there were the Western partners, and they were working with this particular guy, a scientist at the Russian Academy of Sciences, and his wife was part of this group. But everybody said that his wife, the top Russian scientist's wife, she climbed 2 ladders. That meant she worked for the KGB, and everybody was kind of a little afraid of her. So anyway, they were working on this project, and of course it was like, I think he said it was February of 1992 or maybe March. They were having a dinner party, and the Russians, they have this tradition where, you know, person has to say something, and then they drink and they pass it, and the next person says something, and they go around the table. And this other American who was there, he made some comment that set this woman off. He said that he had said, basically, he said, I didn't realize, Russians were so Asiatic, how many Mongol faces there were in Russia. I thought Russia was European. And she got offended by that. And so when her turn came around, she said, she basically was offended by it. She says, she and everybody was a bit drunk then, and I guess her husband was trying to kick her under the table, but she was saying, one day you are going to have a black president. You are not going to be able to resist him, because we communists, we have groomed him. We have prepared him to be your president, and his name is Barack Uganda. Was a chocolate baby. His father was an African, his mother was a white American, and goes through all these things. And everybody's like, and her husband could not shut her up. And she went on and on about how they had prepared this guy, Barack, but she couldn't remember his last name. And Tom Fife was a witness to this. And afterwards, they were all kind of shocked. And he talked to the British partner, and he said, you always hear about, communist subversion and plots and stuff, but you never hear him admitting it or talking about it. And of course, he documented right then, and he wondered about who this person was that they were grooming, that we couldn't resist, that would be president one day. And when he saw this candidate emerging, Barack Hussein Obama, he was extremely alarmed. He tried to bring his story out. He ended up getting on American radio. I heard him because a Russian friend said, you have to listen to this, because I was in Moscow when this guy was, and he's describing it right. And I listened to it, and I thought, it's whatever. So I called the radio station, and I spent quite a few hours talking to Mr. Fife. And I had interviewed a lot of people when I'd worked for media organizations, businessmen who'd worked in Russia, and he was not making it up. He knew how it worked over there. I knew from interviewing other businessmen, and so I realized he was credible. I interviewed him on my radio show, and it's quite a story. It's a very interesting story.
And what's going on with him now, or you rather not say? I mean,
I don't have permission to say anything about him right now, but he's around, and I'm sure, he kind of ducked down because, you take return fire when you start talking about this.
Of
He
course.
wasn't getting, the media was not being nice to you. You get a few people, conservatives or anti-communists, that give you attention, but the rest of the country just doesn't believe communism is real anymore. Of course, now we all know better, right?
Yeah, well,
Black
you
Lives
one would
Matter,
hope.
Antifa, you know, all those people in Portland, Oregon. Hello, Portland, Oregon, right? There's
Oh,
no more
yes.
communists anymore, right? Hi,
Oh,
Portland. How do you like
yeah.
it? How do you like the little red flags and the little beanies with the hammer and sickle on it? How do you like that?
Well, I'm not moving anytime to Oregon, and it's a shame because it's a beautiful country up there, but I don't want to be lynched and killed by Antifa, which people, journalists like Jack Posibiak, and Andy Ngo, who I just purchased both of their books on my
Yeah,
bookshelf.
I get it.
They've
Knows book
done a
too.
very good, really, really good revealing of these of Antifa and various subversive leftist organizations. Do you mind, Jeff, since we're segueing into the Democrats, and then we'll jump back onto Latin America? Do you mind if I read a couple of quotes for the audience? I've read this before on other shows too as well, but I think this is very significant
As
for
long
our.
as it's short, because as you know, on radio, what kills a show is reading things.
I know. It's just so
Be
much.
patient, audience. Be patient.
Well,
It's got
because
to be
this is
something
useful stuff.
juicy.
Because
It's
you're
got to be
not going to
juicy.
get this. You're gonna not get this in any other radio show or TV program.
That's right. Well,
Um,
well, Nevin knows how to find nuggets. Nevin's nuggets, we can call him. He knows
yeah.
how to find juicy little tidbits, and it's like, crap, I didn't know that. That's amazing. All
Well,
right.
like let's, for example, there are two quotes since we're talking about Cuba in the book by the high-level Cuban economics administrator Jose Lilovio Menendez wrote a book called Insider. I have it on my bookshelf, and
Mhm.
according to Menendez, who was present in a conversation with top communists, Fidel Castro declared, quote, if the Democratic Party were in power for 20 years, communism would make considerable progress in the world. You had the top level Cuban military defector, General Rafael del Pino, who was actually at one time the commander of the Cuban Air Force. He had stated something rather similar, if I can find this here. Um, mhm.
When
Maybe.
you've read enough of this kind of thing, it's like pro forma, it's like, yeah, of course, this is the way it works. They're subverting everywhere. And of course, if the Democratic Party were become the permanent ruling party of America, the whole world would eventually go communist. I mean, audience, you know that, right? And
Not
it's not a
necessarily.
crazy, oh, Nyquist, you're just a crazy right winger. No, it's look, I can explain it to you logically. I've been to communist meetings where this has been explained to me by communists. You infiltrate the Democratic Party through its left wing. This was explained to me in, what was it, 1983, March. I was at a communist meeting, and the speaker, he said, we're taking over the Democratic Party through its left wing, and we are going to elect stealth communist president. There's going to be depression, and we're going to flip everything over. That was what he was saying. And he's saying, look, this is a process. It takes a long time. And, they were working on it. And of course, if you look at the Democratic Party, if you read the program of the Communist Party USA, The Road to Socialism, it's called,
Hmm.
everything in that program, the Democratic Party is doing.
Hmm. Well, the
They
Communist
are.
USA Press, and this is something that scholar Trevor Loudon has been very good at. You, me, Cliff Kincaid, and others have written about. Communist Party USA openly talks about the United Front, or whether they term in the 1980s the All People's Front, um, in regards to popular fronts with other left-wing groups. For example, in January 1987 edition of the Soviet military journal Communist Vrezhnik Sil noted, quote, huge communist parties are not needed so long as these parties are able to infiltrate and manipulate other left-wing parties, bringing them to serve the interests of the international communist movement. One
Right.
more thing, guys. one more thing.
Well, right. Wait a minute. Let me interrupt you just for a second to
Interrupt,
underscore
please.
this point, because I get bad arguments from people and they say, you think everybody's a communist in the Democratic Party. No, no, no. The communist movement is a tiny group of communists who manipulate all these fronts and these other organizations, and everybody's not a communist who is in the communist movement. In fact, if I went out and joined stupidly like the Alliance for Survival, right, some environmentalist group, I would be part of the communist movement because that is a communist controlled group, right? But the people in the movement don't know that unless they get smart and figure it out. Anyway, keep going.
Well, here's one more. Peter Goodsite, who was the KGB station chief in New York, recalled that the Soviets intended to, quote, create a group of our people in the legislative bodies, define their political positions, and insert them there to actively influence events. You know, that's not crazy right-wing paranoia. These are from scholarly books or defector literature, not right-wing sources. Now, this one I saw directly through interlibrary loan in the book A Lame Duck in Turbulent Waters, written by CPUSA, former CPUSA chairman Gus Hall, noted in 1972 in the book A Lame Duck in Turbulent Waters, which I interlibrary loaned it, so I fact-checked it. He said that, quote, the liberal wing of the Democratic Party was an, quote, operating leg for party political operations for 25 years. Before that, before 1972.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
everywhere. The communists are everywhere.
Well, they got into the Roosevelt administration, the FDR administration back in the 1930s. You had Venona discovering there's over 300 communist operatives in the Roosevelt White House in 1943. And there were, I think the FBI had a report that said there was something like 5,000 communists in the U.S. government back in the late 1930s. So, I mean, they got an early start, and whatever Joseph McCarthy did, I'm afraid Joseph McCarthy is the villain in the textbooks. If the anti-communists won and communism was defeated, how come McCarthy isn't a hero? Think about that, people. Joseph McCarthy's a villain. You go to any high school textbook, and Joseph McCarthy's a big villain in American history. So how is the biggest anti-communist, the most famous anti-communist in American history, a villain? If the communists were defeated? How? Just use logic. You're being lied to every day on every network, on cable TV, regular TV, whatever. And social media is gaslighting you now too, like Facebook and Google and Twitter and not YouTube though. We're on YouTube. They're good. They're cool, right? Just don't say the wrong thing and they won't kick you off. So anyway, sorry, Nevin.
No. We have you on the show. We have you on this show for your expertise. I mean, on this show, we despise communists and totalitarian variants of socialism and collectivism. So you always have a welcome voice. Your voice is always welcome and appreciated in your expertise, because let's give a little background on Jeff. Jeff, fortunately, has interviewed multiple defectors from at least 3 continents.
And even people that never left Russia or didn't really leave it.
That's true. And people who worked and still work in the intelligence services, like Victor and Marina Kalashnikov. I believe Victor has passed away. He's deceased.
Marina passed away of cancer. I don't know about Victor.
So these are different people. You have contacted people who've served in the Soviet governments, the Yeltsin and Putin dictatorships, Venezuela, Cuba, China. I mean, you've talked to a variety of different people that were even present in the policy making in some level, and they had contact with these leaders. And, how did Colonel Lunev and other Soviet military and political or governmental defectors describe the leaders in the communist country? They're kind of like warm and fuzzy.
No. Colonel Lunev said these are not normal people. These are crazy persons. He described the leadership in Russia at the top of the general staff in Russia as psychopaths. He said they were not psychologically normal. He said they had a criminal mentality. And he
And why
really
are we
underscored
dealing,
that. What's that?
and why are we dealing with these barbarians and butchers?
Yeah, you shouldn't. Basically, I mean, I remember one journalist, I was with Lunev, and a journalist said, well, what do you say about all these people about investing in Russia? This was back around 1998 when the ruble crash happened. I think it was a couple days before the ruble crash that actually he was uh, speaking to a select group of journalists, and he said, my advice, don't invest in Russia. Don't go anywhere near it. You're going to lose your money. you know and unless you he was on another show a little bit later. There was a oil specialist in the oil business, and he said, well, I'm the only person that I know that really didn't get ripped off by the Russians because they need my expertise, and I'm not really in business with them. They pay me to go down there and troubleshoot problems for them, and so I don't get involved with that. So that kind of tells you, a number of the businessmen that I talked to that worked in Russia, there was one, he worked for this Swedish company that set up the cell phone system in Russia, and he was a businessman, and I go, well, did your boss, did they make any money in Russia setting that up? No, we lost money. Do you know anybody that went into Russia in the 90s and made money? He laughed. No, you know. Just look what happened to British Petroleum.
Well, look what happened under NEP. After a while, all those concessions were nationalized. So even if you make money, you always run the risk of losing it all too as well. And come the global Russian Chinese victory, eventually those billionaire collaborators in the capitalist West, eventually, if they're not conscripted to serve the state under duress or for whatever reason, they're all going to get shot in a class genocide, as Anatoly Golitsyn, the former KGB defector, had revealed about the communist planning. Eventually, those billionaire globalist corporate gravediggers of capitalism, they're all going to be rivers of blood, as I think he described in one interview. That's what's going to
Yeah,
happen.
right. Well, the thing is that when you look what happened to the businessmen during the NEP period, they went after the kulaks, who were the most important class of business people in the Soviet Union at the end of the 1920s. They were the successful farmers because people could own their own farms. More than two-thirds of the Soviet population was engaged in farming, and they had their own farms, and it was before farm collectivization, before Stalin did that. And what was the campaign that Stalin started? Eliminate the kulak, destroy the middle class farmers, the prosperous farmers, destroy the prosperous ones, and get the ones that weren't too successful, play on their envy and use them to help you destroy them.
Exactly. And that
Same
created,
thing they're doing here in this country, by the way.
well, I was just going to inject that. And what happened was is they collectivized the farms, and the grain that was exported to the West, including the United States, dumped, I might add, into Western and the American markets. And that put a lot of strain on American and other Western European agricultural producers. And here you have the growing presence of the left too as well. I mean, look at Democratic Socialists of America. They're revealing themselves as a Stalinist organization. Did you know Democratic Socialists of America? Now they're running essays. They ran an essay, and I talked about it in one of my programs here. They're hailing the assassination of Leon Trotsky by Stalin. That they have gone so far, they've dropped that mask. I mean, they already were a Marxist organization that was communist influenced, but now it's like so out in the open, and they have like 60,000 members.
Well, people are so ignorant, they don't even understand the darkness and wickedness of the Stalin regime. And so it's all new and fresh to them. Oh, it's very cool. Oh, it's nice. He's a good guy. Uncle Joe Stalin, he's very cool. No, just the number two mass murderer in all human history. Mao Zedong was number one, his Chinese buddy. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Stalin was an extremely clever, and he was a very important person because he kind of put together Marxism, Leninism, because Lenin died. Lenin had a series of strokes in the early 20s and died in 1924. In January, they buried him well, they didn't bury him. I'm sorry. He's in a display case. Lenin was never buried. He's in a display case. Why don't they bury him? They bury everybody else, but Lenin's been above ground for Well, since 1924, it's almost 100 years, 97 years he's been above ground. And they get him in some kind of vacuum case where he doesn't, crumble. One day he'll start to turn a different shade of purple and
Maybe he'll
different
turn
shade of
red.
red. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah, I was going to say maybe they'll turn red. Maybe they'll transfer his body to Siberia where it actually belongs and just kind of throw it near the Arctic Circle or something or
Yeah, I
another.
think he's been frozen all this time. That's the only
Yeah.
way to make it so the room doesn't stink. But they got in Lenin's mausoleum in Red Square, they got giant crowds of people, especially Chinese who come to visit. They go right by Lenin and they look at him. He's more alive than all the living is one of their slogans. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin and Marxism-Leninism is the official ideology in China. They would have it as the official ideology in Russia, but they had to give it up to perform all these tricks that they've performed, to get all this technology and all this help from Germany and other Western countries that has allowed Russia to build itself again into a military superpower. Because right now, Russia and China are more powerful than the United States now. The United States has fallen behind, and we're seriously behind. I mean, they have war-winning advantages now. And if they decide to get tough and push it in the middle of this pandemic, we could lose. We're likely, I mean, you probably heard some of the war games. The stories out of the Pentagon is we're losing the war games against Russia and China.
We have been for years, even
Yeah.
under and that's something that Trump administration, to its credit, and the military brass tried to remedy. And it's just, we have just been so outpaced by the Russians and the Chinese. And now remember, Dmitry Sudakov admitted in Pravda, I read the article together with you where they basically said we had you fooled all along, and while you
Yeah.
were smashing your tanks, we kept on building up our weapons.
Yeah, that was a two-part article. When was that? 2015, 14? I think it was 2014, right? And he said, "Ha ha, you thought you had won. You were crowing about your victory, but meanwhile, we were building up. We were getting ready to come back, and now you are in a hopeless position, basically." Yeah, that was several years ago. And of course, Putin trotted out in 2018 in his address on the State of the Nation, all these new supersonic weapons and super weapons, including directed energy weapons and new nuclear missiles, and it's just a submarine that could go 180 miles an hour under the water, or no, more than 100 miles an hour under the water, and could carry a 200 megaton warhead, a robot submarine. So these are the kind of things, incredible super weapons that, they're our friend. They got rid of communism. They're not, well, okay, if Russia's not ruled by communists, why are they helping Cuba? Why are they helping Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua? Why have they got troops in Venezuela propping up Maduro? Why are they in Africa? Why are they helping the FARC in Colombia? Why are they helping the Kabila's regime in Congo, or the South African communists, or the Angolans? Why are there regular Russian flights into Angola?
Well, the alt-right, including even Pat Buchanan, sadly says that Russia under Putin is a bastion of traditional values. But yet, Putin at the
Mm,
same time mentions in 2016 that he still likes communist and socialist ideas. Another time in more recent years,
yes,
he says that communism and Christianity are the same thing.
right.
He
That's
said that
right.
favorably. And then at the old Soviet front group, which still exists as a communist front, the World Youth Festival, he said in
Yep.
Sochi 2017, to all these assembled communists wearing Che Guevara T-shirts and all the rest of it, saying, "We're with you, we support you."
Yeah. You are the future. We support you. Yes. Yes.
But he's
And
not a communist, Jeff.
oh, and I've been round and round with so many people over that they will not. It's right in your face now, people. It's right in your face. Russia has been helping China build its military up this whole time. These last 30 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union, they've been engaged in technology transfers to China. They've been giving China why would Russia build up China? Oh, they're enemies. Russia and China are enemies. They got that long border. No, they got that long secure area. They're focused on us. We're the main enemy for them. And, you know, all this activity that Putin and these other people have engaged in, it was all, this was all described in advance by a defector named Anatoly Golitsyn in a 1984 book titled New Lies for Old, in which he said there would be a false liberalization in Russia. The Communist Party would appear to give up power. And the West, if the West believes it, they will have a tremendous advantage because they will be able to build up and come back years later in what Golitsyn described as one clenched fist, where China and Russia and the world communist movement would be united to smash. And he said there would be no anti-communists to oppose them, because if you say communism is dead and China is just a shell of a communist state that's really capitalist, and communism has fallen in Russia, then anti-communism as a counter movement ceases to exist, because how can you have anti-communists when there's no communism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is how they defeat we take away the image of your enemy, and then you can't fight us.
Hey, Jeff, I found an interesting quote where we're talking about how you have the envy in this country with the growth of the left, the class envy and whatnot. It made me think of this little nugget, as you like to describe it. Gloria La Riva, who is the one of the top officials of a Communist Party known as the Party for Liberation and Socialism, which was an offshoot of the Workers' World Party. And it garnered, by the way, in the last election, 74,000 votes. Is not insignificant. And she actually said in an interview, Gloria La Riva of the Party for Liberation and Socialism, known as the PSL, she said that, quote, the fog of anti-communism is lifting from, quote, the negativity and misunderstanding of the past to acceptance. Part of the reason why communism is making advances in this country is, number one, we keep congratulating ourselves that the Cold War has ended, that Russia is no longer secretly communist, that China is reforming, all the rest of it. I also argue have a lot of structural issues that is driving people to the left. We may agree to disagree on that. And then you have the last issue, which you and I both have personally experienced, is also the lack of education on exactly what communism is, what it represents, and its aggressions throughout the world. I went to a top-notch private school in Long Island, and the historical textbooks on the Cold War history unit, when I took it in senior year high school, I commented at the time, it was like Oliver Stone wrote the textbook, and this is at an elite private school. So
no more traditions, chains shall bind us. Arise, ye slaves, no more in thrall. The world shall rise on new foundations. We have been not, we shall be all.
That's the Internationale, isn't it?
That's right.
I wish this was Jeopardy.
Yeah, because that's what they believe. They will recite that. They will sing that. I understand they used to sing that at the meetings of the National Lawyers Guild here in the United States. Look, you think communists don't exist? You know what? You're stupid. You're just ignorant if you don't believe they exist. And if you don't believe they're trying to take over the country, look around you. What do you think's been going on? What do you think's this Russian-Chinese military resurgence after 30 years? What do you think the fall of the Berlin Wall was? It was a scam. What do you think? We disarmed, they rearmed. They got their fifth generation weapons. We're just kind of, 1 foot in the grave, 1 foot on a banana peel. I mean, it looks like we're on the way out. When are we going to, I try to tell people this, they look at me funny. It's like, you're going to wake up, you're going to wake up one day and the whole world's going to be flipped upside down and you're going to go, I don't know. I don't understand why this happened. Yeah, because you never did your diligence. You never paid attention. You never did any reading. You never noticed anything. You weren't a citizen. Sorry. You lost your country.
So getting back to Latin America, what do you think we should do at this point? You mentioned, of course, the strategic geopolitical sort of chess if Russia moves into Ukraine or China moves into Taiwan. But what would, if you were President Joe Biden, or let's say you had the opportunity to say, hit the road, Joe Biden, I'm taking charge of national security, how would you address the pro-freedom rebellions in Cuba, and also what happened a few years ago where the Venezuelan dictatorship was almost overthrown uh, um, uh, before they got even more support from China and Russian troops? What would you do? How would you handle it? It's a very sticky situation.
Well, I mean, it's yeah, it is a sticky situation. Look, I don't have all that secret intelligence that our leaders have, so I couldn't know exactly what to do without having, and I don't even know if their intelligence is any good. I would be inclined to um, be very proactive as a in terms of communist regimes in the Western Hemisphere. I would not want those regimes to stand. But of course, when you had whatever happened, how come there's a communist dictatorship in Nicaragua? How come we had a process where that wasn't going to happen? Remember when that war ended down there in Nicaragua decades ago? How is it that Ortega is the dictator of that country now? 30 years later. How is that possible? See, the thing is that how is it possible that sub-Saharan Africa, that they look what's happened to South Africa? We were told that communism was dead so they could get rid of apartheid because after all, the communists were one of the reasons they were worried about the communists, taking over through black tribal groups, and they were going to, through the ANC, they were going to take over the country. Well, they said, well, there's no threat from Russia anymore. I guess the ANC we can have majority rule. Look at the country is been looted now. It's being systematically destroyed. They're preparing, a civil war is being prepared, and they want to wipe out, some of these black communists down there want to wipe out the Indians, the whites, and the Zulus that are resisting, right? So there's that. I mean, that's what's being prepared right now. I mean, these are things people who were saying, look, we can't do this 30 years ago. We can't hand over the country to the ANC. They're communists. They're going to end up looting the country. There's going to be a genocide of white people, of Indians, of certain black, because all the black tribal groups, they aren't the same groups. It's a bunch of, it's a cross patch of, it's a patchwork of different tribal and ethnic and racial groups in South Africa. Look at the disaster that country has become under the ANC. The ANC is just again a front for the Communist Party of South Africa. Joe Slovo, he was behind the scenes, a white guy from the Soviet Union, right? Running the puppet show back there 30 years ago. And Nelson Mandela, he was a communist, right? Did I miss something?
Revealed after he died. That was revealed he was a secret member of the South African Communist Party.
Yeah. Well, many of us knew it when it was supposedly secret. It wasn't really that hard to figure out.
Well, no, it wasn't.
No, it wasn't that hard to figure out. It's not that hard to figure out who's probably a secret communist here in the United States right now.
Oh, I could name some names.
What do you think of our vice president, by the way, who's very likely to become president one of these days, given the age and physical condition of our president? What do you think?
The one who's polled as the most unpopular vice president in years? You mean her?
That's quite a distinction, isn't it? To be
yes, it is.
Maybe the most unpopular vice president.
You heard that.
Spiro T. Agnew was pretty unpopular after he got found out, but yeah, she's pretty unpopular. Yeah.
Yeah, she's a real piece of work. I have no particular love for her. Personally, did you want to? I mean, you were from California, the Socialist Republic of California. So, what was Kamala Harris like? You, as a former constituent in California of hers when she was senator.
Well, she's part of that San Francisco crowd, connected to China and the far left, in a state that was moving further and further left. I mean, I would characterize this crowd is Bolshevik. They were Marxist. I think some of them, Willie Brown self-identified, I think, as a Marxist. I don't think he was that hidden about it. He was, by the way, he got into the California Assembly by Jim Jones campaigned for him. And
when another Jim Jones
character. Yeah, Jim Jones of the People's Temple. Remember where we get the term drank the Kool-Aid? He was a Stalinist Protestant minister in Northern California, right? Can you
Yes.
let me, the guy with the dark eye, Jim Jones, make him drink the Kool-Aid, went down to Guyana. You know that he originally didn't want to bring his People's Temple to Guyana. He wanted to move it to the Soviet Union. Did you know that?
Yes. He
Yes, he
willed
wanted to
the
move the People's Temple, and he was a big supporter of Willie Brown. And when he got his People's Temple, when they drank the Kool-Aid, and it was, I think it was V.S. Naipaul's brother, Shiva Naipaul, interviewed him. And he said, what, you know, you knew Jim Jones. What happened there? I don't know. He was a good Marxist. I don't know what happened to Jim. There's a quote in Shiva Naipaul's book, famously, Journey to Nowhere. It's about California politics. It's about Jim Jones coming out of that milieu and Willie Brown and who those people were. It's a brilliant book. Shiva Naipaul, I think, died at an early age, and it's a shame because he was really brilliant. And that book, Journey to Nowhere, is an extremely brilliant book. And that
yeah
will tell you about, if you want to read about California politics and understand it, Journey to Nowhere is about Jim Jones and his connections into, and of course, who is Willie Brown? Well, he was one of the people responsible for Kamala Harris's rise in California politics. Well, they were an item at one time, right?
Well,
Right?
he was active, if I recall correctly, in the International Communist Front. Used to be controlled by the KGB and International Department at the CPUSU. Willie Brown was involved with the World Peace Council, I believe.
Well, Willie Brown was, to use his words, a good Marxist.
You
Why
know,
wouldn't
and a
he be?
lot of other California politicians. Let's take a look at Ronald Dellums, for example. Ronald
Oh
Dellums
boy.
was a communist. Remember good
Yeah,
old Ronald?
yeah. You see, the thing is that there is no, it's not in the United States, it's not a crime to be a communist. You can be one, you can work for your cause. And the thing is that if anybody dares say, even if they're admitting it, that they're a communist, I knew I'll tell you, um, that Congresswoman down in Watts,
Maxine Waters?
Maxine Waters. Okay, I knew this guy. He did sound systems for events, right? And he was under the stage. You know how they build a big platform? And
Hmm.
Maxine Waters was on there with Bill Press. Remember Bill Press?
Yes.
Bill Press, the commentator who used to be on Crossfire with, I think it was Pat Buchanan, right? That was
Yes.
Bill Press, Pat Buchanan.
Amongst others,
So Bill
yes.
Press was sitting up on the stage, and this guy's wiring, he's plugging in the stuff underneath him, but he's right underneath him so he can hear them talking to each other. And they're both telling each other how they're communists. And he's hearing it through the floorboards of this thing. He's going, he says, my eyes got really big. They're both, Maxine Waters and Bill Press are really communists, and they're telling each other this, and I'm underneath. They don't know I'm under there. Am I in trouble? It's like, okay, those are the kind of stories in California you hear from people who are, I mean, it's not, you hear these things, you know people who know people, and they tell you, it's not surprising. People's Republic. Um, and of course, I got out of there because I don't know what the future of the country is going to be, but I know the future of California. They got a bear and a red star on their flag. Somebody was thinking ahead there.
It makes other parts of the country look much more inviting and tempting to go to. Yeah,
Even
California,
if
it's a
it's
shame.
even if it's frozen 6 months out of the year, it's more inviting.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Well, any other closing comments? Anything you want to comment about latest developments in Russia and China? Military buildup?
Well, more news that Russia's moving its economy towards a war economy. And, I don't understand this analysis because I don't keep up with all the developments in the Russian economy, but that's what I'm seeing go by in the headlines. And of course, the military exercises, the quick mobilization drills, the rotations of reservists, the movement of military units into the Arctic. And you saw here in the United States, they were practicing here in the upper Midwest, training, I think it was A-10s, on using the freeways and roads as runways, dispersing
Mhm.
the United States Air Force being dispersed from its airfields, which is a avoidance measure to avoid surprise attack.
Mhm.
And then they would be
Interesting.
using highways interstates and long stretches of paved roads as runways, which is why a lot of the interstate system was built for that purpose, so that in a nuclear war, our Air Force would disperse and they would have, places where they could refuel along the highways, but they would use the highways as runways, in a war. So we're seeing both on the American side and the Russian and Chinese, there's some kind of alarm that war could be coming. And of course, for some of us, I think a biological war started. I think World War III might have started with the release of COVID-19, that was the first step in a war. And that's why we're still in that step, because we're never, I think we're in a, I think we may be in a progressive spiraling process from here on out. And these moves by Russia and China suggest that they think so too. They think we may be in that too.
Well, and I tend to agree. I've mentioned this on my show even yesterday with Herschel Miller, my co-host. Look, I'm convinced that there's a very real possibility that China purposely released COVID as a biological warfare attack to cripple our economy and as an act of bioterrorism on top of that as well. And what evidence do we have? Well, we have circumstantial as well as somewhat smoking gun evidence. You have a defecting Chinese virologist, I forget her name, it's a woman, and she's been exposed on some of the conservative media outlets. And she has said that COVID originated in the PLA, Chinese PLA facility, the Institute of Virology at Wuhan. She has mentioned that. You have in the mainstream press talk by various Chinese communist academics and officials saying, we won the trade war, we won the biological war. This was during COVID. They've mentioned that.
Yeah.
You look at PLA General Chi Hao-shin's speech from 2005. You look at what even the Clinton State Department and not State Department, Defense Department reporting that since the 1990s, China has been developing biowarfare capability. And there are probably other things that I'm missing too as well. There's plus the essay that you wrote where you connected the dots early during the COVID pandemic, where you're talking about how you had the dispersal of Chinese nationals for the Chinese New Year after the COVID pandemic, leaving Wuhan. A lot of things just don't make sense. And the fact of the matter is, whenever the lips are moving on communist leaders' face, they're lying, to paraphrase you. You cannot trust them to do anything right, to be honest, to tell the truth, to be transparent. It's just not in their interests to do that.
What's baffling is sometimes they lie even when they don't need to, and you think maybe it's just to stay in practice.
So COVID, it is my personal belief that there's a very, very good chance that COVID is a biological attack against the United States, a precursor. And it really, what's very sad, depending on your political positions, wherever you are on the moderate left or moderate right, it's very terrifying that it has revealed the sharp divides in this country, for better or for worse, on both the right as well as the left. And that's extremely dangerous. And I very much fear when the Red Dawn, if and when the Red Dawn scenario or one clenched fist pans out, what's going to happen with our population?
Yeah, well, and just to mention this, I mean, if it's a biological attack, people say, well, they attacked themselves. China got the virus too. Yeah, well, they're a totalitarian society, and that actually they were having protests in China, and the lockdowns and the virus helped them to get control in their country again. And it also was useful for eliminating the weak and the elderly because of the one-child policy. They're overloaded with elderly. If this thing sweeps through China and a bunch of the elderly die, they don't have to support them anymore. And in a communist regime, that kind of thinking actually is part of how the system works. Eliminating useless eaters is not just a theoretical idea. And of course, if it backfired on them in Cuba, that is the one place where it looks like it's really hurt them. But they've both in Russia and China, they were having bad protests in Russia too, and the lockdowns helped to contain that to some extent. But in the United States, we had massive left-wing communist-led protests in the United States during that period. We did not lock our country down in the way that Russia and China locked theirs down. So, yeah, difference between a police state and a republic.
Yeah, free republic, relatively free republic compared to a totalitarian police states that basically weaponize science to the extreme.
Yeah,
And it's deeply frightening, and I fear for this country's future uh, when one clenched fist happens. I mean, I pray that we're a united people, but after COVID, you would think that COVID we would be united. And our government has really not leveled with the American people, other than perhaps to some degree the recent House Republican study, which shows that COVID originated in the Wuhan Institute of Virology lab. I
yeah.
give them credit for that, but although they say it was leaked or accidental released, but truth be told, I mean, there's really, the federal government has not leveled with the American people. It's just like the Kennedy assassination. It was revealed that the Soviets and the Cubans had a hand in the Kennedy assassination. There are multiple sources that I can
Yeah.
list. And the reason why the Johnson administration didn't want to reveal the full extent of the Cuban and Soviet role in the Kennedy assassination is they want to provoke World War III because the American people found out they'd want blood. Kennedy was a very popular president in many ways, and they find out that he got assassinated. Well,
Well, though
and I
remember the memory of World War I was still not that long gone. When I was a little boy at that time, we had people in our church, guys that fought in World War I. Because remember, in the early 1960s, the guys that fought World War I were still in their 60s and they were around. And that war was caused by an assassination of a leader. World War I was caused by the assassination of Archduke Francis Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. That's what caused that war. And so people knew that. Everybody knew that. In those days, everybody knew that. Nobody knows even who that is. In World War I, did that happen after or before World War II? Whereas one young lady once called it World War 20. She called World War II World War 20. So she didn't quite understand. It's
Any words of hope before we leave, Jeff?
uh, words of hope. No. I mean, hope on a diet, maybe. No, hope is the great destroyer because hope is what people have who don't want to sit on their hands and, well, I'm just going to hope. You can't hope. You've got to get informed. You've got to do something. You've got to be smart. You got to be a citizen now. However late in the game it is, you got to try to figure things out. And that's what I'm hoping I'm trying to help people to do, to figure it out. It is people will say that what I'm saying is too simplistic. It's actually very complicated. Everybody's getting the short version. Read some books. Read my book, The Fool and His Enemy. That's a quick read, 3 hours. You can get a lot out of that one. And go to Amazon, my blog, jrnyquist.blog. Go there, read it, and learn some things. And Nevin's books. Nevin's got so many footnotes, so many interesting little details that basically just show you how the world works. I mean, a tremendous amount of work, Nevin. I just can't believe the 2 volumes. It's so jam-packed with stuff. I mean, people. I mean, they're just massive resource right there, showing, what this is all factual. That this is the whole history that we thought just happened the last 50 years is not what really happened.
Yeah, it's an independent analysis. And the other book I recommend of Jeff's, I'm saying this to the audience, is Origins of the Fourth World War. That is an extremely penetrating work of history, political science, sociology, and economics all wrapped up in one. That, out of all your books, I would recommend Origins of the Fourth World War. Is available on bookfinder.com, amazon.com. I'm sure you could probably write Jeff Nyquist to get purchase a copy from him.
If you email me, and my email is on the contact information on jrnyquist.blog, I've got a closet full of books. I got some left. I can mail them out.
Good, good. Alrighty, Jeff, this has been an excellent interview as always. I appreciate you stopping by on the show. I'm going to be out for a part of next week, picking up my daughter, going to beautiful Vermont, and spend about 2 days beforehand, pick her up on Friday, and then leave back for Florida on Saturday. So maybe perhaps we can do a quick show, perhaps while I'm in Vermont, with all the sun and the beautiful country out there.
No, we'll both be in the far north then.
Exactly. That'll be nice.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Jeff. I really appreciate it. Always insightful analysis, and we'll be sure to do this again.
Okay, thank you, Nevin.
All righty.